Hello, and welcome to what's quite a sad video, to be perfectly honest. This is something that has been on my mind for probably the last. When did The Lost Metal come out? Probably the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, that I have been feeling that this was inevitable. Um, and that's that I'm probably finished reading Brandon Sanderson. Now, I plan on kind of splitting this video into kind of designated parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about why I originally started reading Brandon Sanderson, why he means so much to me, and why I loved a lot of his work. Then I'm going to go through my ratings for his books and kind of explain the central thesis for why I don't believe that it's worth it for me anymore. And then kind of go into the feeling I have for where the Cosmere is going and why that's not for me, why it was never for me, and why it's better for me to dip now, and why I think there's going to be a lot of people that are in a similar situation to me, and I think that I'm just going to voice how I feel. Inevitably, this is a Brandon Sanderson video, so I expect that this will probably get more eyes than my usual video does, and will have a lot of strong emotions, to say the least, because Brandon Sanderson fans are a passionate bunch, including myself, hence why I'm here. And I just firstly want to state that this decision is not based on a ill will or like hatred or anything. This is purely resignation, and if anything, I think that it is the best decision. I was talking to Grace about this. I think there's the best decision to make is to drop off here, where I still have books that I love by him, than to keep reading him knowing that I feel like I'm not going to enjoy it more and more each time, and just get more and more bitter and more angry and more disappointed, and just become one of those people. And I don't want to be that person. So I think it's better to cut myself off. Now, first part of the video, let's explain my journey with Brandon Sanderson. I first read the Mistborn trilogy when I was around 13 years old. My brother had just gone to university, and he came back from he bought them before he went, and when he came back from his first term, or at some point, he bought all the books back with him and was like, you have to read this. Stuffed it in my face and was like, you have to read this. And I loved the Mistborn trilogy. I still love the first Mistborn trilogy. It's one of my favourite series. I absolutely adore the Final Empire. I love Hero of Ages. Sazed is one of my favourite characters. Vin is one of my favourite characters. And the Mistborn trilogy did so much for, firstly, being an adult fantasy that younger people could read, drawing people into adult fantasy, opening up an entire world that people my age weren't aware of, to be perfectly honest. Like, we had Game of Thrones, things like that as well. But that was alongside big pieces of media. The Mistborn trilogy was the first thing that wasn't adapted, that pulled you into the idea of like, oh, you don't have to just read the stuff that's on TV that's being made. Like, there's an entire world of fantasy books out there that haven't been touched yet. Like I said, I loved that trilogy. It was a defining period in my childhood. I read that, went on to A Song of Ice and Fire, and so he was a central part of my teenage years, my childhood. And then going forward from there, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I had stopped reading by that point. I had a terrible experience at one of my kind of later years at school where a teacher completely ruined my passion for reading, ruined my enjoyment of the subject. And when COVID hit, I had the Stormlight books. I've been buying them because I knew I liked Brandon Sanderson, and I knew that eventually books were going to return into my life. And so I had them waiting for me. And during that time where like everything closed down, I had nothing to do. I was just working from home, and I just picked them up and I started reading them. And the Words of Radiance completely broke me down. I cried during the arena scene. It completely tore me apart. And specifically those first two books and also Oathbringer. They are special books to me, and Words of Radiance is still, in my opinion, in the top 5 best fantasy books that have come out in the 2000s. I think they are a grounding. Both Mistborn and those early Stormlight books are groundbreaking in terms of laying the foundations for where fantasy has gone, be it both positively and negatively. They are cultural touchstones in the fantasy community, and that was my experience. Up to that point, I had read those 6 books, and I was there. I was ready for Rhythm of War to come out. So that I think that foregrounds, that sets up where I am as a fan. Brandon Sanderson was my favourite author. At some points, he was the only author I was reading. He got me into reading as a young adult. He got me back into reading as an adult. He's foundational to the core of who I am as a reader and who I have progressed to be. I would not have gone back to university and got my degree in English literature if I didn't start reading Brandon Sanderson again, and then go from there to reading other things. The man was on a pedestal that he didn't make, and a pedestal that he has no responsibility for, but a pedestal that a lot of us put him on. Did he lean into it? 100%. This kind of goes into Brandon Sanderson is a businessman. He's a very good businessman. If there's one thing that I personally do not vibe with art, it is someone who, in my opinion, cares more about the money than he does about the art. And over the last 3 to 4 years, I think I have seen Brandon Sanderson change from someone who seemed to care about his art more to now someone who cares about creating the biggest business he can and making the most money that he can. And I think that reflects in the quality of the product that he is putting out. I'm going to read you from bottom to top my ratings, lowest to highest, of Brandon Sanderson books and the year they were published. So let's just do that. You'll see the ones that I haven't read, obviously. There are a lot of Brandon Sanderson books I have not read. I stick to the Cosmere, and I have not read everything in the Cosmere. But I still think, regardless, my central thesis remains the same. Now, The Alloy of Law is at the bottom with 2.5 stars, published in 2011. Edge Dancer with 2.75 stars in 2016. Warbreaker, 2.75 stars in 2009. The Lost Metal with 3 stars in 2022. Elantris with 3 stars in 2005. Wind and Truth, 3.5... Actually, no, I've changed that. Wind and Truth is 3 stars in 2024. Rhythm of War is 3.5 stars in 2020. The Secret History is 4 stars in 2016. The Bands of Mourning is 4 stars in 2016. Shadows of Self is 4 stars in 2015. Tress of the Emerald Sea is 4 stars in 2023. Dawnshard is 4 stars in 2020. Oathbringer is 4.25 stars in 2017. The Well of Ascension is 4.25 stars in 2007. The Way of Kings is 4.5 stars in 2010. The Final Empire is 4.5 stars in 2006. The Hero of Ages is 5 stars in 2008. And Words of Radiance is 5 stars in 2014. Now, all that is to say that provides an average of 3.8 rating, which is a good rating. There are authors that have much higher average ratings with a larger, a large number of books that I've read. Abercrombie, Hobb, Erickson, people that I have now, Pratchett, people who I have now read since Sanderson, who average way higher and produce, in my opinion, much stronger quality. Now, they take a lot of different times to write. Erickson put out at the same speed that Brandon Sanderson does, like once a year. It was crazy how he did Malazan in that time. Then you've got people who take breaks, like Hobb, etc. Each to their own. Nothing to do with the speed of which he puts it out. However, the quality is being damaged as that goes along. And my main point is that I have not rated anything higher than a 4. So like something that would be a 5-star on Goodreads, a 4.5 or a 5-star. I have not given anything by Brandon Sanderson that since 2014. it has been over a decade since I've read a book by Brandon Sanderson that I would give 5 stars to. Now, I've read them all in a short space of time. That's an important thing to reiterate. I've read all these books in the space of 4 or 5 years. But in terms of when he wrote them, it has been over a decade since he wrote a book that I have read, that I have loved. That it's an important distinction, because I think a lot of people have got into Brandon Sanderson over the last 4 or 5 years, same as me again. And we trick ourselves into thinking that the quality has been around for a long time. But the drop off that is Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth in Stormlight Archive and Mistborn Era 2 is what we've had for the last, since 2014. Like, if we're counting Oathbringer, since 2017. So let's be kind. It's been 7 to 8 years since there's been a book that I think has been, like, top tier. Because Mistborn Era 2... This transitions into a different thing. I don't want to go into it just yet. But it was just when I wrote them out in that way that I realised that the thing that was always the case is that you can look, for instance, and I have rated The Way of Kings 4.5 stars in 2010 and The Alloy of Law 2.5 stars in 2011. He has always produced quality that varies massively throughout his career. But the thing that's happened in the last 7 years is that he has not produced anything, in my personal opinion, that has complemented the stuff that is a lower rating. It used to be, it was worth dealing with some of the bottom stuff, some of the Warbreakers and Elantris. For me personally, I know people fucking love that shit. This is just for me, allow me. There were the Hero of Ages, there were the Final Empires, there were the Way of Kings, there were things to make that worthwhile. There was an equilibrium formed. And unfortunately, the top has been shaved off, lowering the entire image. I think that has a lot to do with, unfortunately, losing his editor. Wind and Truth, Lost Metal, these are not only, I know line editing, I'm someone who has harped on about the line editing inside of his books, but also structural editing, the signposting. It's not just the veneer, it's not just his prose, it's foundational. It's the very, like, it's the pillars that hold up the story, the character motivations, the arcs. All of these things have been hampered, and I don't know what's caused it. Whether he's trying to pump it out and he's got too many fucking eggs in too many different baskets and he can't focus because he's thinking about the next con he's got to set up and trying to get a film made in the most perfectionist manner that's never going to happen. I don't know, but the quality of books is taking a hit, and his popularity is rising at an immense level at the same time that his actual creations are diminishing. And that's a horrible thing to see, because in his head, they're still getting banger reviews. He's still getting high 4s, like, in Goodreads terms, fucking perfection, whilst also having much lower quality for what he's putting out. And I think that it's a problem that the entire community has. There is a Sanderson Boost to ratings. He is inflated. People talk about his books. I am a victim of this myself. There's a reason I've gone back and I stick by every word I said in my Wind and Truth review, but it's not a 4-star, it's a 3-star. The words are the exact same, but me inputting that metric, that completely banal and reductive metric, I have put a 4 instead of a 3, even though my words remain the same. And there are a lot of people in the community that are victims of the exact same thing. We all do it, and I think we all can admit that to ourselves, that there are probably books by Brandon Sanderson that we have rated higher than we probably should have, and when we look back on it, we're like, nah, it probably wasn't that high, but yeah, you know. He's a fever dream. He's a movement. You get lost in it, and it's understandable that it happens. But Now we have reached a point that I can't lie to myself anymore. You know, I think there's a reason that Wind and Truth has had such a vitriolic reaction. And that's because when Mistborn Era 2 fucking sucks and tanks and fucking the Lost Metal is the most mid thing that's ever existed, and I hate a lot of the crossover stuff, and it's just disappointing in general. He can get by because it's not a bad book. Like, that's the bizarre thing. The lowest rating I've given is for Alloy of Law is 2.5. I've never rated a book negatively. I've always been like, this is average to upwards, because he balances. He works. He's like min-maxing as an author. He knows what he's good at. He knows what he's bad at, and he plays those against each other and finds a line to skirt. And the problem is that pure genius also came through in that. He's like Taravangian. Words of Radiance and Alloy of Law being written by the same author is baffling. It is truly incredible that those two things came out of the same author. And the fact that the Words of Radiance and Wind and Truth came out of the same author is crazy. But what happened is that, yeah, everyone kind of had this idea of, if the secret projects, if they aren't my favourites, that's what it is. There were secret projects. Mistborn Era 2, you know, that was a write-off. You know, he's kind of said that he didn't plan it and it's just kind of going where it's going. No one thought that Stormlight would get that treatment. You know what I mean? Like, everyone, Stormlight is the self-proclaimed magnum opus, the end-all be-all, and I don't think any of us thought that he would let the issues he's had in other series infiltrate and mire Stormlight, because it hasn't previously. You know, like, Words of Radiance is coming out the year before, is coming out after Alloy of Law and before Shadows of Self, and still manages to be one of the best fantasy books of all time. And I think when we read that book, and you've got line editing issues, and you've got structural issues, and character arcs are being completely cut apart for this larger Cosmere movement, our characters that we have loved are reduced to two-dimensional versions of themselves because of where they need to go. It was a problem I had in Rhythm of War personally with certain characters, and then we have it here, and I think a lot of people took that to heart, and that's why we've seen such a large pushback. I don't think anyone saw it happening to Stormlight. I think we all had this foolhardy dream that wouldn't come at the cost. It wouldn't be part of it. That's kind of where I'm at in terms of what I want to talk about is the future of the Cosmere. Now, when I started reading Brandon Sanderson with the Mistborn trilogy and The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, etc. Firstly, when I was a teenager reading Mistborn, I was not aware of the term Cosmere. It was not. People like to daydream that the Cosmere's always been around. It was not. It was not being spoken about. He did not have the fan base. It did not exist as a term that all the fans just have in their heads. The most we had was Hoid Wit, something like that, or Hoid in like Elantris or whatever. I always forget which ones they are, but like you've got like Elantris, and then you've got Mistborn. You're like, same name. That's interesting. What's this? It was like he proclaimed it at the beginning, the world's biggest secret crossover universe. And what we've evolved into is no longer a secret crossover universe. Lost Metal and Wind and Truth now signpost themselves as moving forward. You can read in whatever order you want, I think, to get to those two books. But now, proceeding past this, you have to read in the order that the books are coming out, because I think the series are going to inform each other and will spoil other things from across different series. And that was never what I wanted. The second thing I never wanted was when I read the Mistborn trilogy, when I was starting to read Stormlight, these are industrial, maybe, but older feeling fantasy books. Now, Stormlight gets away with it because from the very beginning, invention and that kind of thing is foundational to that world. I have adored the progression that we have for the first three books in terms of, and the fourth book actually, in terms of science and in terms of magic system and the explanation and the manipulation and the inventions that are made alongside that. One of my favourite things. But what has happened is, firstly, we're having storylines repeated across series. Spoilers for The Lost Metal and for Rhythm of War. In Rhythm of War, we get to experience Navani and Rabonia working to create Tower Light. An amazing storyline. And then I got to read Waxilium do exactly the same fucking thing, pretty much, making a nuclear weapon in The Lost Metal. Like, the next book that comes out. Like, when did The Lost Metal come out? 2022. So 2 years later, I am repeating this same storyline. And then you've got the Ghostbloods. I've been invested in Shallan, and then suddenly I'm reading a different character actually get involved with the Ghostbloods at its core in a different series that then changes how I view the Ghostbloods in the other series, which then when I go back to Stormlight for Wind and Truth, Stormlight's gone, so why the fuck would Ghostbloods give a shit about fucking Roshar anymore? That was the only reason they were there, pretty much, was to try to get Stormlight off-world. So if at the end of Wind and Truth, Stormlight's gone, why the fuck would the Ghostbloods care? At which point, why were the Ghostbloods edged and teased to us for 5 books for it to end with them pretty much going, that was a weird cabal cult that we had nothing to do with really, and they're better off dead, so who really cares? Let's get back on with the Mistborn one. Let's go on to Ghostbloods. Why was I ever meant to care about Ghostbloods in Stormlight? I hated them all the way through. I hated in Lost Metal when we had to go through her, Marassi experiencing the Ghostbloods before Shallan, and then at the end, the Ghostbloods don't even fucking matter. And that to me is the biggest indicator for why I do not want to read Brandon Sanderson anymore. Because he has given absolutely no foundational reasoning for me to believe that he can do the Cosmere, the crossovers, well. He hasn't. Because it was completely ill-used in The Lost Metal. It was cheesy, it was awkward. People are coming in and just having all these different powers and they're played. I hated reading those parts of The Lost Metal where we've got people from different lands. And it should be cool. But it wasn't. It was clunky and awkward and I just didn't like it. So alongside that, we've also then got in Stormlight Archive, people like Hoyd now just throwing out willy-nilly all kinds of different colloquial language, throwing out all kinds of terminology within the Cosmere that should be blowing every single fucking person's mind. Like in Wind and Truth, he says just sentences that everyone should be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And instead, everyone is an empty void because they need to have the story happen to them and they're just going, and it's so annoying. Hoyd in the beginning of Wind and Truth is so frustrating in my opinion. And I find all of the beginning of Wind and Truth frustrating. I said that in my review. Days 1 and 2 are an absolute chore. And then going beyond that, yeah, you've got the Ghostbloods. Pointless now, in my opinion, for the Stormlight series. Unless something happens to provide a reason. At the moment, there is no reason that I can think of other than laboriously finding a way to keep them around for the Ghostbloods to be interested in Roshar because the main source that Stormlight provided no longer exists for them, so there's no need for them to try to stick around. Unless they now try to go for Void Light, which is a whole different affair. That would be a whole different thing that Like, I can see that happening, that the Ghostbloods decide to make a deal with Odium, but then can they really do that? They're locked off in a temporal lock, so like, can they really talk to him to even set up a deal? I don't know. Nevertheless, the central point of what I was saying remains the same. The overt crossover things that he has done have not worked for me. And as a result, the fact that I think that's going to become more and more common fills me with no confidence. I have no confidence in the fact that he will do that organically, delicately, and provide, this is the most important thing for me, to make sure that the crossover does not come at the expense of the characters that we already are invested in that series. In Wind and Truth, the most disappointing characters to me were Kaladin and Dalinar. I thought he actually did a good job with Shallan, given the fact that they were dealing with Ghostbloods that I don't give a shit about. Her actual character progression was really good, in my opinion. But Kaladin and Dalinar were reduced in that book. Kaladin is not the same character anymore. He's a character that in the space of one day goes from trying to commit suicide to being good. And I think that's the biggest spit in the face that Brandon Sanderson has done. I think in the future, God forbid, when time goes by and people go back and reread and actually process what happens between Rhythm of War and the very next day in Wind and Truth, it will fucking get eradicated, because all the good work he did in terms of mental health representation is undone. Because I already didn't like that he tried to commit suicide at the end of Rhythm of War. I thought it was tasteless and tactless and was put in there to exploit the depression. Whereas, so I was already off on a bad foot. But to go from that to him then being fine in Wind and Truth and playing this quasi different character who, I don't know, it just didn't work. It really didn't. And Dalinar, I don't know. I was so unemotionally connected to Dalinar's end, and then the fact that we're going to have the Blackthorn around, that's another thing. Brandon Sanderson cannot let characters die. We've now got Kelsier, we've now got fucking the Blackthorn hanging around, and it's just like, these are no longer the characters that we liked. You have bastardized them in the sense of bringing them back, and they are now no longer the character that they were. And that holds across to a different thing, which is that, unrelated to the crossovers, I also have a problem with how he deals with legacy characters. Specifically, Harmony. So, spoilers for Mistborn Era 2. And Tensoon, actually. When I read Mistborn Era 2, I hated Harmony so much, because I love Sazed. Sazed is one of my favourite characters ever. I love that character. And he's not that character anymore. He is instead servant to two shards that are immovable in terms of their core tenets. And as a result, our character is lost to these immovable god god manifestations. Not actual god, just shards or whatever. Harmony loses himself. Like, Sazed is no longer there, in my opinion, and I found him frustrating because he does not talk, he does not act, he does not make decisions like Sazed ever did in the original trilogy. He's not the same character. You may as well have just killed him off and just said that the shard they clashed together and they created a new being, because he's so unlike that character that what's the fucking point? And alongside that, Tensoon, fuck me, was he poorly done in Era 2. He's a fucking wet wipe who, Tensoon's so awesome, and he's the one. He stands up, he goes against what he believed and everything. And then he's just there in fucking Mistborn Era 2, like, well, you know, we don't think it's that way. Like, you've provided us with evidence, but we're just going to keep going with the way we were doing before. And it's like, fuck off. That's not Tensoon. It's like you're writing a different character because we now need to like the new characters. Taravangian has ascended and is another dual shard holder, and so I love Taravangian, and I don't know how I feel about where Taravangian's going. I don't know. I don't have faith, based on how he's done Harmony, that Taravangian will still be Taravangian, and I thought it was good in terms of what he did in Wind and Truth. Apart from the Carbranth stuff, that shit sucked more than life itself, and but I have no. Once he gets out of that kind of framing, once he kind of gets unleashed on the Cosmere, I can't imagine that he's going to stay true to that central character, and instead he'll just become what is needed for the larger story. Dalinar as the Blackthorn now. Why keep him around? There's just so many things that I'm just like, I have no excitement for where the Cosmere is going. I have no faith. I have no trust. Everything that has ended in the Lost Metal and in the Wind and Truth has burned a lot of bridges and a lot of trust and a lot of faith I had in him, and the journey that he was taking us on. Like I said, when I read Mistborn Era 1, I never wanted to have this mass jump in time. I never wanted to end up in a bit where I'm reading Mistborn Era 3 and it's like a modern style like spy thriller. It was never what I signed on for. And Stormlight, I never signed on to it to have book 5 where he's now rewriting these ancient beings into having an understanding of physics, which has never been based inside the text at all. And he's changing how they speak because he needs to rapidly accelerate the place and the world building and the technological level they're at because of an inevitable crossover. And that was never what I was invested in. I was invested in the characters, Stormlight specifically. It's a 10-book series. It's not like Mistborn Era 1. I can go back and read Mistborn Era 1. That is my plan, is just to go back and read Mistborn Era 1. And I can read that and put it down and not have to read anything else. Stormlight is a series unto itself. It's not like the first 3 books were one series and then we've gone from there and I can just read those first 3 books. That's not the case. This is going to keep going and keep going, and I don't want to keep tarnishing my memory of those first 3 books. I don't want to know where it goes, honestly, because I think it's going to end up in an advanced society with sci-fi influences, with crossovers, with all kinds of things that I think it's lost the grounding that made Roshar so special. And it's lost the nuanced world building that it had. I could make this video forever talking about it. I'm not going to, because it's pointless. Because people watching this, they'll either be listening and thinking, oh my god, I completely get what you mean, and extrapolate, or people love the series, which I completely understand, and I support you in doing that. This is very specifically about me and why I think it is time for me to bow out. Because like I said, I have no excitement, I have no trust, and I truly don't think that the series is now being written for me like it used to be. I'd be very interested to hear people's thoughts, because I think there's going to be obviously a lot of heated emotion, a lot of agreement, a lot of disagreement, probably more disagreement, but I've just had conversations with people, and I think there is a general feeling that this is a possibility, and I feel like I just want to break the dam, because inevitably this can only, me stopping reading can only be a positive thing, because then I won't be negatively talking about Sanderson or talking about him in general, which would inevitably probably be negative, and it allows the people who just enjoy his work and want to keep reading it to keep reading it. You don't need me around after this telling you why I think that Atlantis 2 Electric Boogaloo is not the world's greatest piece of literature. You don't need me to tell that. I hope I'm wrong. I would love that once the Cosmere is finished, that people go, that actually was amazing and all came together. And guess what? I can go and read them all. And that's why I think I'm happy with the decision I'm making, because the books aren't going to go anywhere. They're going to be published. They're going to be there for people to talk about. and I can get to them when I want to get to them. And that won't be for a while. And I know that the next book isn't going to come out for a long time anyway, but even then, I don't think I want to be involved in a hype train again. I don't think I want to go through the emotional roller coaster of being disappointed that way. So, yeah, that's my general thoughts. If you have any specific questions, just put them in the comments and I'll reply to it. If you did enjoy, please do like, please do subscribe. Patreon stuff's in the description as always. I look forward to the death threats. And as always, have a nice rest of your day.